April 26th, 1986, 1:23 in the morning. Deep inside a power plant in Soviet Ukraine, something goes catastrophically wrong. A 2,000-ton steel and concrete lid gets blown straight into the air, like a bottle cap popping off a shaken soda can. In seconds, the core of reactor number 4 is wide open to the sky. But this wasn't a bomb, and it wasn't just one guy's mistake. It was a reactor built with a hidden design flaw, a safety test that went sideways, and a string of human decisions that turned routine into catastrophe. This is why Chernobyl actually exploded. Step by step. No myths. Let's start with the reactor itself. Chernobyl nuclear power plant sat in northern Ukraine, part of the Soviet Union. Right next to it was Pripyat, a brand new city built just for plant workers, about 50,000 people, many of them nuclear engineers and their families. The plant had 4 working reactors, each a Soviet-designed RBMK, with a 5th under construction. It was showcased as proof that nuclear power could safely fuel the future. Our story centers on reactor number 4. On April 25th, 1986, plant operators planned something routine. A safety test, one they'd actually tried and failed at before. The idea was to check if the reactor could survive a power failure. But to understand what went wrong, you first need to understand how this reactor actually worked. Inside every nuclear reactor, atoms of uranium fuel split apart. That splitting is called fission, and it releases a huge burst of energy. Each split fires off neutrons that smash into more uranium atoms, which split too, creating a chain reaction. All that heat boils water into steam, and the steam spins turbines to make electricity. Here's the key detail. Fast neutrons are bad at causing more fission, so RBMK reactors used graphite blocks as a moderator to slow neutrons down. Slower neutrons split uranium far more efficiently, keeping the chain reaction going. To control the reaction, engineers used control rods made of boron, which absorbs neutrons. Push the rods in, the reaction slows. Pull them out, it speeds up. Graphite to sustain the reaction, boron rods to control it. Simple enough, in theory. Now add water into the mix, because water did 2 jobs here. First, it carried heat away from the fuel, keeping the reactor cool. Second, it also absorbed a small number of neutrons, slightly slowing the reaction too. But when water heats up and turns to steam, it forms gaps called voids. In most reactor designs, more steam means the reaction slows down. That's a safety feature. RBMK reactors did the opposite, and this is the flaw at the heart of the disaster. When water turned to steam, the reaction sped up, not down. Because graphite was already doing the neutron slowing job, water was mainly just absorbing neutrons and holding the reaction back. So less water meant less absorption, meant more neutrons, meant more power. More power made more heat, which made more steam, which made even more power. This is called a positive void coefficient, a runaway feedback loop baked directly into the design. Western reactors were built to avoid this. Soviet RBMKs were not. Soviet nuclear scientists actually knew about the flaw before Chernobyl, but incidents and warnings were kept quiet, not widely shared with plant operators. The flaw was most dangerous at low power output, exactly the situation planned for that night's test. And there was a second flaw, just as dangerous, hidden in the control rods themselves. Each boron control rod had a graphite tip at its bottom end. When a rod was fully pulled out, that graphite tip sat right inside the reactor core. So when the rod moved back down to shut the reactor off, graphite entered the core before the boron did. And graphite pushes neutron-absorbing water out of its path as it descends. For a few fatal seconds, inserting the emergency shutdown rods could actually increase reactivity instead of stopping it. 2 hidden flaws. Both would matter enormously on the night of April 26th. Now picture the control room of Reactor 4, late in the evening of April 25th. The safety test had been delayed all day because of unexpected grid demand. Kyiv needed the electricity, so operators kept the reactor running longer than planned. By the time the test finally began, a different, less experienced night shift was in charge. working from a test plan that hadn't been fully reviewed for safety. Around 11 p.m., operators started reducing the reactor's power, as the test required, aiming to stabilize it at a lower controlled level. But almost immediately, something started to go wrong. Power dropped far lower than intended, much closer to zero than planned. Quick pause. Here's what this test was actually for. If the plant ever lost outside power, cooling pumps needed electricity to keep running. Diesel backup generators existed, but they took about a minute to spin up to full power. Engineers hoped a coasting turbine could bridge that gap, using its leftover spin to generate power in the meantime. It was a reasonable idea, and one Chernobyl had already tried and failed to prove twice before. Meanwhile, something invisible was quietly working against them. Xenon 135, a byproduct of fission that absorbs neutrons and naturally builds up. At low power, xenon builds up faster than it burns off. This is called xenon poisoning. And it was smothering the reaction, dragging power down toward a near shutdown. By around 12:28 a.m., power had crashed to nearly zero, far below the test target. By protocol, this was the moment to abort the test and shut the reactor down safely. Instead, the shift supervisor decided to push forward and restore power. To fight the xenon poisoning, operators began pulling control rods out of the core. Safety rules required a minimum number of rods to always stay inserted. That rule was violated, and by the end, almost all the control rods were pulled out of Reactor 4. Power did rise, but only to a fraction of what the test required, and the reactor was now running in the exact zone where the positive void coefficient made it unstable. Operators also had extra cooling pumps running, pushing more water than usual through the core, cooling it close to boiling, right at the edge of turning into steam. By 1:23 a.m., the reactor was primed like a loaded spring. It was finally time to begin the actual test, so operators shut off steam to the turbine, letting it begin coasting down on its own. As the turbine slowed, so did the pumps it was powering, meaning less cooling water flowed through the core. Less cooling meant the water still in the core started to heat up fast, and steam voids began forming rapidly throughout the reactor. Remember the flaw, more steam meant more reactivity, not less. The reactor's power began climbing on its own, faster and faster, and within seconds, alarms were going off across the control room. One operator made the call every operator is trained to make in an emergency. He hit the AZ5 button, the emergency shutdown, designed to slam every control rod back into the core at once. But remember flaw number 2. Graphite tips led the way down, ahead of the boron. For a few catastrophic seconds, the shutdown button made the power spike even higher. Power surged to roughly 100 times the reactor's normal output. Fuel pellets shattered instantly under the extreme, sudden heat, and white-hot fuel fragments blasted into the surrounding cooling water. The water flash-boiled into steam almost instantly, and pressure spiked catastrophically, with nowhere to go but up, straight into the reactor's massive lid. The lid lifted, snapping the fuel channels underneath it like matchsticks. At 1:23:44 a.m., the first explosion tore through reactor number 4. A second explosion followed almost immediately, likely a mix of steam and hydrogen gas, and together they blew the roof off the reactor building completely. Witnesses miles away saw the sky glow in eerie blue, white, and orange as radioactive graphite and fuel debris rained down across the plant site. For the first time in nuclear history, a reactor core was blown wide open, exposed directly to the atmosphere. The graphite moderator itself caught fire, and it would keep burning for days, sending a plume of radioactive material rising high into the sky. Firefighters arrived within minutes with no idea they were battling a nuclear fire. Many climbed onto rooftops just meters from lethal radiation levels, and within hours, many of them were suffering from acute radiation sickness. Soviet officials, meanwhile, hesitated, unwilling to admit the scale of what had happened. Just 2 kilometers away, the people of Pripyat went about their mourning completely unaware. The evacuation of the entire city wouldn't begin until the following afternoon. Within days, radioactive fallout was detected as far away as Sweden, and it was a Swedish nuclear plant, not Soviet officials, that first alerted the world. So why did Chernobyl actually explode? A reactor design that became unstable at low power? A shutdown system that could briefly backfire instead of protecting? A safety test rushed forward with an inexperienced crew and an unreviewed plan? And a series of human decisions that pushed a fragile, already unstable reactor past its limit? After Chernobyl, this exact design flaw was fixed in every remaining RBMK reactor worldwide, and it reshaped nuclear safety standards across the entire world. Chernobyl wasn't just bad luck, and it wasn't just human error either. It took a flawed machine and flawed decisions together to cause the disaster. If you want more deep dives like this, subscribe and let me know what disaster you want explained next. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.